Chapter 10 of the late Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great. This recording is in the public domain. Read by Dennis Sayers. The late Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great by Henry Fielding. Book 2, Chapter 10. Sea Adventures Very New and Surprising. When they arrived at Harwich, they found a vessel, which had put in there, just ready to depart for Rotterdam. So they went immediately on board, and sailed with a fair wind. But they had hardly proceeded out of sight of land, when a sudden and violent storm arose, and drove them to the southwest, insomuch that the captain apprehended it impossible to avoid the Goodwin Sands, and he and all his crew gave themselves up for lost. Mrs. Heartfree, who had no other apprehensions from death but those of leaving her dear husband and children, fell on her knees to beseech the Almighty's favour, when Wild, with a contempt of danger truly great, took a resolution as worthy to be admired, perhaps, as any recorded of the bravest hero, ancient or modern. A resolution which plainly proved him to have these two qualifications so necessary to a hero: to be superior to all the energies of fear or pity. He saw the tyrant Death ready to rescue from him his intended prey, which he had yet devoured only in imagination. He therefore swore he would prevent him, and immediately attacked the poor wretch, who was in the utmost agonies of despair, first with solicitation, and afterwards with force. Mrs. Heartfree, the moment she understood his meaning, which in her present temper of mind, and in the opinion she held of him, she did not immediately, rejected him with all the repulses which indignation and horror could animate. But when he attempted violence, she filled the cabin with her shrieks, which were so vehement that they reached the ears of the captain, the storm at this time luckily abating. This man, who was a brute rather from his education and the element he inhabited than from nature, ran hastily down to her assistance, and, finding her struggling on the ground with our hero, he presently rescued her from her intended ravisher, who was soon obliged to quit the woman in order to engage with her lusty champion, who spared neither pains nor blows in the assistance of his fair passenger. When the short battle was over, in which our hero, had he not been overpowered with numbers, who came down on their captain's side, would have been victorious, the captain rapped out a hearty oath, and asked Wild if he had no more Christianity in him than to ravish a woman in a storm. To which the other greatly and sullenly answered, it was very well, but him if he had not satisfaction the moment they came on shore. The captain, with great scorn, replied, "Kiss," etc. And then, forcing Wild out of the cabin, he, at Mrs. Heartfree's request, locked her into it, and returned to the care of his ship. The storm was now entirely ceased, and nothing remained but the usual ruffling of the sea after it, when one of the sailors spied a sail at a distance, which the captain wisely apprehended might be a privateer, for we were then engaged in a war with France, and immediately ordered all the sail possible to be crowded. But his caution was in vain, for the little wind which then blew was directly adverse, so that the ship bore down upon them, and soon appeared to be what the captain had feared, a French privateer. He was in no condition of resistance, and immediately struck on her firing the first gun. The captain of the Frenchman, with several of his hands, came on board the English vessel, which they rifled of everything valuable, and amongst the rest, of poor Mrs. Heartfree's whole cargo, and then taking the crew, together with the two passengers, aboard his own ship, he determined, as the other would be only a burthen to him, to sink her, she being very old and leaky, and not worth going back with to Dunkirk. He preserved, therefore, nothing but the boat, as his own was none of the best, and then, pouring a broadside into her, he sent her to the bottom. The French captain, who was a very young fellow, and a man of gallantry, was presently enamoured, to no small degree, with his beautiful captive, and, imagining Wild, from some words he dropped, to be her husband, notwithstanding the ill affection towards him which appeared in her looks, he asked her if she understood French. She answered in the affirmative, for indeed she did perfectly well. He then asked her how long she and that gentleman, pointing to Wild, had been married. She answered, with a deep sigh and many tears, that she was married indeed, but not to that villain, who was the sole cause of all her misfortunes. That appellation raised a curiosity in the captain, and he importuned her in so pressing but gentle a manner to acquaint him with the injuries she complained of, that she was at last prevailed on to recount to him the whole history of her afflictions. This so moved the captain, who had too little notions of greatness, and so incensed him against our hero, that he resolved to punish him, and without regard to the laws of war, he immediately ordered out his shattered boat, and making Wild a present of 6 biscuits to prolong his misery, he put him therein, and then, committing him to the mercy of the sea, proceeded on his cruise. End of Book 2, Chapter 10. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California, for LibriVox.